This happened a while ago. I had downloaded Tinder begrudgingly just to try it out. I'd rather meet someone organically in my real life, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to try a dating app, especially because my friend met her longtime partner on there. Anyways, I had matched with a girl who I'll call R. Our first conversation took place on the Sunday evening, and I went to sleep at about 10:30 p.m. And on the next day, I went straight to the gym and work. When I looked at my phone around lunch, I had noticed I had a notification from Tinder. It was from R, and she had sent me a couple of long messages telling me very personal stuff. The last message read, "Did I scare you off?" I had sent a voice note to my friend, asking if I was simply being paranoid or was that a little red flag. I mean, it just felt a little clingy. I decided to respond, and I explained that I was in work, and I responded to her messages. We only spoke for a week, but throughout the week there were several red flags that I ignored. I felt like I was being paranoid, but looking back, I really don't think I was. She kept talking about her ex, and she was constantly complimenting me. She had asked for my phone number after one day, and I said no. She was upset about this, but I told her that we had to talk some more before I felt comfortable doing that. She then said, "Well, ask me anything," whenever I explained that I needed to get to know her better. Looking back, I feel like this might have been her way of trying to get my number quicker, if that makes sense. I guess now is a good time to mention that I'm a girl too. R then told me that she was from another country and that she moved here due to her parents being homophobic. She told me that she had no relationship with her mom, which becomes relevant later. As our conversations progressed, she had started to get overly flirty, constantly telling me that I was beautiful, the most beautiful girl in the world, and so on. Her location was only 1 hour away according to her profile. She was always talking about her ex, and honestly, it just never felt right to speak with her. But again, I thought I was being too judgmental, and I kept talking to her anyway. By day 5, she had asked for my number yet again, and I gave it to her. She messaged me right away and told me, "I really hope you don't regret giving me your number," which is pretty eerie looking back. The day after I gave her my number, she had asked if she could ask me something. I said sure, and she asked when she could take me on a date. I told her that I wasn't sure. She started to guilt me, saying we'd been talking for a while and that we had to meet sometime soon. Honestly, the thought of meeting her just felt wrong. Something always just felt slightly off. I ended up saying that if we met, it would have to be a Saturday. And suddenly she had us going on a date that Saturday coming. She told me we should get coffee and go for a walk, which I agreed to. Part of me felt kinda weird about it all, but I thought I was being silly. Looking back, I now realize I cared way too much about seeming paranoid. My entire body was screaming at me to run away because I knew something was off deep down. But you live and you learn. I'm still a young girl, so I guess it's normal to make dumb decisions sometimes. Anyways, she insisted on driving to where I live to have a date with me. She told me it was 2 hours away despite her profile having her as 1 hour away. I told her I'd rather meet halfway, but she insisted on coming right to where I live. She didn't know my address, and she suddenly told me that she was going to come over to my house after our coffee. I was taken aback, and I told her she couldn't come to my house because I didn't feel alright with that. This next part makes me cringe to type out, and I can assure you that I cringed just as much when I read it. She then said, "When I fuck you, it has to be at your house. I share a bed with my mom right now." I was immediately put off. I don't care what other people do, but for me, her saying that and being so pushy was just really unattractive. Sex is a big deal to me, and I just got such awful vibes from this girl. It was almost like she was telling me we would have sex, which also put me off. Anyways, well, we're talking on this social networking app called WhatsApp. And for anyone unfamiliar, you can read a message on there without opening it by clicking the notification in the notification panel of your phone in a certain way. So I did that, and I don't actually know what made me do it. Usually I would click on her message right away, but this time I looked at it without even clicking on it. The moment I clicked on it, she'd know I'd seen it. I immediately called my best friend and then told her everything. She had been telling me for a while that I wasn't being paranoid, and that if I felt something was off, then it was. She then burst out laughing when I told her about the weird sex comment, purely out of discomfort and shock, plus the obvious cringiness of it. Another thing though, the comment about sharing a bed with her mom freaked me out. I don't care how bad it sounds. It just seemed weird as hell to share a bed with your mom at her age. I mean, she was in her mid-20s, and also she had told me that she didn't even speak to her mom. She said that she lived alone here, and that her mom lived in her home country and they didn't speak due to her mom hating her for being a lesbian. So she had obviously lied. Plus, I just felt like it was weird that she was sharing a bed with her mom, and everything just boiled over in my mind, and I suddenly realized I was so stupid for talking to her. As I was talking to my friend, she had also messaged me to tell me that she smacked her aunt, and basically she told me she hit her but it was a joke and that I'd never have to worry about her hitting me. That freaked me out too. My friend then told me to just ghost her, and that's what I did. I blocked her phone number and then blocked her on WhatsApp. So the next morning I woke up and she had messaged me from another number telling me that she didn't know what she did to me. My friends all said this was odd, but I felt really bad because I know that ghosting is bad and immature. After 5 days had passed, I decided to unblock her and message her to clear the air. I just felt like I had to be mature and tell her my issue with her instead of just ghosting her. So I then messaged her and I introduced who I was, and I told her that I wanted to tell her why I ghosted her. She replied telling me to explain myself, and I did. She then replied, saying, "First of all, I'm never violent with women in my life because I'm not aggressive, and I get on top of my aunt to fight her because it's a joke." Then she said that I clearly had issues and it was ridiculous that I didn't want to meet her because I apparently need to meet people sometime, and she wasn't moving too fast. It was just me moving too slow. Then she said, "I only asked you on a date, not to marry me, and it wasn't just for sex." But she ignored the fact that she invited herself to my house and then told me that she was going to apparently fuck me. She also said that she wasn't using me for sex, but that sex isn't a big deal, and she didn't see the point in waiting around since she liked me. This pissed me off again. This expectation and the fact that she would be telling me what we would be doing instead of actually being engaged with me and making sure that I wanted to be intimate with her. It was just fucking weird and so creepy and desperate. She then told me that I was just like her toxic ex who had cheated on her for 2 years. Then she said, "I stayed because I'm such a loyal person." So basically calling me toxic because I didn't want to fuck her after she invited herself to my house. I ended up getting so mad, but I realized there was no point in arguing. I'd done the mature thing by saying my piece, and there was no point in saying anything else. So I then replied that I wouldn't message her again, and she replied later telling me not to be hard on myself. I blocked her again, and that was it. All I know is I feel like I dodged the biggest bullet in the world. Now, I don't know if this story is any good because it really might suck, and it might not be that scary. But I guess it shows the importance of listening to your gut instincts and to never explain it away or downplay it. You aren't being paranoid, and if something feels off, it definitely is. It's usually a red flag if someone's acting desperate and wanting to meet you right away, and also not caring about your boundaries. There was a lot of weird things about R, and I'm honestly just glad that I never met her, because if this was just her messaging, who knows how she would have been in person. Stay safe, everyone. A few years ago when I was 21, I was on a date with a guy that I had met on a dating app. I'm the type of person who wants to really get to know people. So when I was on the apps, I would prefer to meet up sooner rather than later just to see if the sparks are flying. Our first date was in a restaurant. It wasn't anything posh, but it wasn't a fast food joint either. I'll call my date Calvin. He seemed like a regular guy in our chats. He cracked a lot of jokes, but it was never inappropriate, so I didn't get a red flag. He was polite too, and he seemed like a regular guy. However, I quickly realized upon meeting in person that I'd been mistaken. Calvin was trying too hard with the jokes, and he started to be off-putting. I arrived 5 minutes early, and he was there waiting for me, all fine and nice. When he greeted me, he had tried to fist pump me. When we said hello, he then laughed that he was really glad I was hot in real life. I cringed a little, but I tried not to be judgmental. Our conversation went downhill and fast. He cracked jokes about literally everything I said. I told him about my job, and he had made a sexist joke about how he was shocked that a woman was smart enough for it. I made a face and was about to answer him back, but he made yet another sexist joke. I was eventually able to tell him that he wasn't funny and this wasn't the way to woo me, but he just made more jokes. I remember thinking, yeah, this is gonna be a long night. I was hungry though, so I decided to just sit it out. I mean, it couldn't be that bad, could it? Well, it was. I tried to ask him questions, but he just continued cracking jokes, and he wouldn't be serious at all. He also told me that he loved pranks, and he went on and on about how he loved to pull pranks. At one point, he had asked me how many sexual partners I'd had, and he informed me, "You don't look like the type of girl to put out easily." And then he laughed like a hyena when he said this. I then told him that this wasn't appropriate to ask on a first date with someone that he didn't really know. You guessed it. More jokes. He was disrespectful and he mocked my food choice, mocked my drink choice, then asked me if I was getting a dessert after my main meal. Then he made a joke about how I'd ruin my figure if I stuffed my face. I was fed up by this point, and I just wanted to get away. I didn't have dessert. Not because of his little smart-ass comments, but because I just wanted to go home. I was so done with this absolute clown. When we left the restaurant, I had turned to him and I said I was going home, but that I was glad we met and got to know each other. I said that last part in a way where it wasn't suggested that I liked him. Hopefully that makes sense. He asked how I was getting home and I said I was going to walk. It wasn't far and it wasn't extremely late at night. And I felt safe doing the walk. It was bright and I felt fine. Calvin said how he wanted to walk me, but I just said no, it's okay. He continued to insist, however, and it was annoying me. I even began walking after saying no thanks, and he started to follow me. I felt really annoyed and awkward, but I just continued walking. I eventually had an idea and then said, "Fine, you can walk me up to my street." He grinned and he was even excited about it. He continued to annoy me and I tried to acknowledge his existence every so often to be polite, whilst also being careful to not lead him on. Now, I wasn't about to let Calvin walk me to my place. I decided I'd lie about where I lived, then dash home without him. My plan seemed to work, as when I was about 5 minutes away, I walked into the wrong street and then stood at the bottom of the road. I told him this was it and that I was going home now. He told me that it was great to walk me home and that he enjoyed himself. I grimaced and then said goodbye. He gave me a hug and it was incredibly awkward. My arms were pinned to my sides. He pulled away and then smiled at me, then turned away and started to walk away. I waited until he was fully out of sight before dashing off into the correct street. I then walked slower to my house as it came into view. I was sighing to myself and thinking about how shit that date was, how I was going to tell him right away this isn't going to work, how I was unmatching him, etc. I got to my front door and got my key out. I unlocked my front door, and as I put the key in the lock, I had heard footsteps dashing up behind me. I unlocked the door and then had this feeling of horror and panic, like I've got to get into my house right now. I didn't even turn around, but it was too late. I then felt arms wrap around me and then push me into the door. I was pinned like sideways, if that makes any sense. Just in my doorway, front door wide open, and I felt breath on my earlobes. A voice then whispered, "You didn't want me to see where you really live, did you?" I thought, this is it. I'm going to be raped and murdered by a psycho. Just as quickly as the arms had wrapped around me, they let me go, and I was then met with hooting and cackling laughter from behind me. I spun around in panic, then saw Calvin standing illuminated by the streetlights outside. In that moment, I had felt a mix of things: fear, panic, uneasiness, and total rage. I stammered out "What the hell?" and he continued laughing. I stood there in shock and anger as reality then sunk in. Calvin finally calmed down enough to tell me that he knew that I didn't live where I'd claimed, that he knew I wasn't feeling the date, and that he thought he'd pull a prank to make me laugh. He just kept saying, "I thought you'd find it funny," when I ended up erupting on him. I then shouted at him that it wasn't fucking funny to creep on a woman, follow her home, and then grab her from behind and whispering menacing words in her ear. I was so fucking angry. I couldn't believe how clueless and careless this total son of a dick was. I told him to get off my property and to just leave me alone. He seriously acted like he couldn't understand what the big deal was. I was so angry and I felt so shaken up by this. I was even angrier that this idiot had gotten to me so deeply. I told him to leave, and he did. I slammed the door and locked it, and immediately unmatched and blocked him. I praised myself for not having exchanged numbers with him or any other social media. I immediately called my mom and best friend to then tell them about what the hell had just went down. They were just as mad and horrified as I was. I was of course relieved beyond words that nothing bad had happened to me, but it was really terrifying in that moment. So to any men listening, don't do this shit. It isn't funny. Women have a real fear of men following us and trying to harm us sexually and physically. These pranks will never be funny, and I refuse to believe Calvin was really that dense that he didn't know exactly the fear he was instilling in me. I wonder if he wanted to punish me or something. It really unnerved me to know that he knew where I lived. That night I had the house to myself because my roommates were out. I really hated being home alone after that, and I was so hypervigilant and very paranoid afterwards. I was glad to move out a few years later into my own place, and if Calvin ever happens to hear this, all I have to say is fuck you. I hope I never see your sorry ass ever again. When I was 19, I started dating. For context, I'm a girl. I met a guy through Facebook dating. It was a friend of a friend of a friend situation. His name was Scott, and he was tall with brown hair and tattoos on his right arm and hand. He seemed normal over our messages, so we had decided to meet up at our local coffee shop. I live in a fairly big city, but it wouldn't be busy where we met. It was nearly afternoon and he was right on time. He went in for a hug when we met, but it felt natural. We got our coffees and a snack and it settled down to chat. We were seated at a nice big window and I felt warm and fuzzy. Scott was 21 and he was more muscular in person than I'd initially realized, but that didn't bother me. I've never cared about body type much. He was wearing a tight t-shirt, and I felt like he was trying to draw attention to his arms. I had asked about his tattoos, and instead of telling me the meaning behind them, he had asked me if I'd like to touch them. I stroked one of them and then complimented it again. He started being a bit weird from here on out. He started flexing his arm, and in my head, I was just thinking, what? I thought he was nervous, but when I moved my hand away, he actually grabbed it and put it back on his arm. I then stared at him and tried to pull away. He held my hand on his arm and then said, "You like how strong I am?" I mulled over on what to say, going through a list of possibilities. Do I cause a scene? Do I stay calm? What the fuck was he up to? I tried to keep my voice calm but firm, and I told him to let go of my hand. He did, and he started laughing. It was an uncanny laugh, like he was some alien or something. It was so fake. I then took a drink of my coffee, and it was suddenly very awkward. He kept grinning at me, and I just felt uncomfortable and weirded out. I tried to ask about his tattoos yet again, but he just wouldn't tell me about them. Maybe there really was no backstory, but I assumed there would be. He started talking about how he loved the gym, and I said that I could tell, and sort of laughed to keep everything light and breezy. He then started to say that he loves being strong and loves working out. Nothing wrong with that at all, but I was still weirded out at having him held my hand down like that. When he stopped talking, he had asked what I thought about his muscles, and I just said something like, "Yeah, it's cool that you have a hobby you enjoy." He got all serious and he asked again if I liked them. I decided to just say yes, and he smiled at me. He said good, and then it was his turn to take a drink. I felt really weirded out now, and I was starting to really wish the time to pass so that I could just leave. Wishing that I had some button to do that thing in the movies where someone phones you and then you pretend you need to leave for an unforeseen circumstance. I decided to steer the conversation to something else entirely, but he wouldn't budge. He stared at me and he told me that he was really into having girls worship his muscles, like this was a bedroom activity that he liked. Now, I don't think there's anything bad about that, but he was acting really weird prior to this, and it's the first time we'd met. Not really first date shitter in my opinion. I was unsure of what to do. I feigned interest, asking how he learned that about himself. Big mistake. When he finished telling me way too much intimate information, I excused myself and I said I needed to use the toilet. I took my bag with me, and he noticed but didn't care. I then went into the bathroom and called my mom, asking her what to do. She told me to be honest and just tell him that I wasn't feeling it and to leave, but I was scared to look rude. Chronic people-pleasing tendencies at this age. I don't know how long I was in the bathroom, but it was definitely too long. I ended up deciding that I'd fake being unwell. I came back out and he was facing in my direction, like he'd watched the bathrooms the entire time. I decided that I'd rather embarrass myself and get out of this shitty date than just be assertive and risk being rude. So I told him I had an upset stomach and I really needed to go. I lied and I said I was lactose intolerant and they must have put in the wrong milk in my drink. He had to have known I was full of shit. Excuse the unintentional irony. Still though, he acted like he believed me and we walked out. He then walked me to my bus stop and he even went in for a kiss, which I swerved. As soon as I was on the bus, I blocked him. I avoided the friends of friends of friends who knew of him from there on out. I know this story isn't the most pearl-clutching, spine-tingling horror story in the world, but there's some pretty unsettling thing about how you think someone is normal after chatting to them, and then underneath the surface is a whole world of weird. His behavior was very weird. He was obsessed with his own muscles and got way too sexual way too quick. Red flags galore. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day everyone, and remember to always